Hello, and you are listening to Laura, and I'm the creator and host of Stewards of the Sea, LLC. And in this segment, we'll plunge into the world of what I like to call upcycle art culture. Ocean conservation for the preservation of our ecosystem has always been my lifelong focus and passion. So stay tuned for important and invigorating dialogues with many artists that share my same passion for creative reuse. Red Hook, Brooklyn is a neighborhood located on a peninsula in the southwest area of Brooklyn, New York City. Their neighborhood is roughly bound by the Gowanus Expressway to the north and the Gowanus Canal to the east, Upper New York Bay to the south, and Buttermilk Channel to the west. Much of the credit for the boom on the Brooklyn docks goes to William Beard, an Irish immigrant and successful builder and railroad contractor. It was Beard's vision and enterprise that transformed 1 million square feet of submerged marshland into the largest man-made harbor on the eastern seaboard. Consummate recycler William Beard built the warehouse from rough-cut Manhattan schist salvaged from several excavation jobs in the city. He even took advantage of empty European vessels arriving in the harbor laden with rocks for ballasts. The Beard warehouse still rests upon its foundation of stones bought from around the world. Organized in 1978 by 16 artists looking for a place to exhibit, BWAC has grown to become Brooklyn's largest artist-run organization. They take pride in all their volunteer operations. We are happy as Stewards of the Sea in our upcycled genre segment to speak with artists whose artwork was selected for the 2023 Recycle exhibit. Brooklyn Waterfront Artists Coalition National Juried Art Show, crafted from cast-off, discarded, and repurposed materials, celebration of ingenuity and imagination. So this is how I want to roll it out. Did you have a mentor? Did you have someone inspiring you in your life?
My mother was a creative person. My mother had studied opera, but for her, it was very important that her children have an appreciation of the arts. And then I went to Pratt. I originally went to Pratt Institute to study fashion. My first two jobs out of school, which each lasted for about a year, were as a fashion illustrator. People always said that my fashion drawings were very illustrative. At the time, this was in the early 70s. The thought was that if you were Black, you could only draw Black people. I remember going for an interview at one of the big publishing companies, and the woman did books or catalogs for engineering schools. And she looked at my portfolio and she said, I know what you'd be really good for. Once a year, we do a book on women and minorities. And I remember taking a breath and looking at her and saying, I think my portfolio shows that I can draw anything. And the only reason all my published work is only Black related is because that's all that people will give me. But I walked away from that thinking, okay, I've got to find another way of coming at this so people can't put me in a hole.
Formal education, I went to Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts. And that's really, I went there for education. I took this sculpture class, my professor Kelly Goff, who I think has always been, one of my biggest inspirations.
So you found conceptual art. Great.
My mind, I construction for so long. I knew how to build stuff. I didn't know how to draw. That was always what threw me off. I was like, I don't have to know how to do that. I can just make exactly. Right. I can just do I know how to stick things together. And just like, you can make art out of literal trash.
My grandmother, my dad's mom, was a folk artist and so dedicated to that. She's who taught me how to sew and how to manipulate fabric in that way. And being around someone who didn't really do it for any type of attention, but purely just because it brought her so much joy, that was really amazing to see. And I feel like I have an appreciation for clothes and for fabric in a way that a lot of us don't really get anymore, because we're not really taught who makes our clothes and how they're made, and a lot of the time the violence that goes into it. It's a very exploitative industry. So I think having a woman in my life from a very young age that taught me the importance and the beauty of the single thread that creates all the clothes that we wear.
Art materials, reused art materials, has been kind of a foundation of my process because of an old mentor of mine in college, the University of Virginia. Professor Bill Bennett, he just retired. His kind of style always had what he called kind of like an artifact quality. So he was always finding things and kind of adopting those objects' history into his work. And just by the nature of having a mentor like that, it seeped into my own work. And some of those artists, like El Anatsui, he's an artist from Africa that uses crushed liquor bottle caps and makes these wonderful tapestries with them. And then kind of like my art idol, Felicia Barlow, she's a British artist. And she makes these like magnificent architectural structures of, with this upcycle is the word that is the appropriate terminology.
Yeah.
Upcycled timber. And she'll actually, after an installation, she'll reuse the timber again for like the next installation, completely different piece of artwork. So I had always been really fascinated by that kind of conceptual installation with upcycled materials. And so I incorporated that in grad school, and I kind of became my thesis.
I was a jewelry designer, and I designed jewelry for 20 years, went to Rhode Island School of Design for jewelry. One of my early inspiration, or someone who's passionate about art, was Gaudi.
Yeah, you can feel it in the mosaics and your Gaudi influence.
I really loved Gaudi's work. That mosaic style, like just covering something with unusual materials or organic material, has always been, a fascination for me.
I am actually a psychologist and a teacher by trade. I did grow up in upstate New York, surrounded by beautiful mountains and valleys. And I was lucky enough to grow up in a log cabin with a lot of water nearby, some ponds nearby. So I feel like I have always lived close to the water. And in the year 2016, I found myself sort of called to do this line of work. I think politically there was a lot going on in our country then, and I really felt like I had a lot to say. And I chose just, using a visual artistic means to do that. Part of the work that I do with my upcycling work really connects me further to the water. And I really just think it's about, at this point, raising awareness of the ocean and how we can protect it as well as benefit from it.
I've always kind of had an interest in the arts. Like I still, as far back as I can remember, I think the one thing that kind of kicked it on was I still remember a first grade teacher I had it was the school's art teacher. And then what happened with the scheduling or something like that, but it was, for some reason that year, she was the first grade teacher. So almost every project that we had some kind of art involved in it in some way, shape, or form. And I just remember that being like a fantastic school year.
Yeah,
and
great.
That stuck with me. And I was even thinking, like, even in first grade, second, like going on, I'm like, why? We had an art teacher for an entire year. Like that was our teacher was the art teacher. And that, I thought that was great. But and then I don't know if that was the reason, but it was always just something that I knew I was going to do. I like doing it. So it was just a matter of like, I will end up doing something in the arts, just don't know what.
Is that what you do now, Joe? You're an art teacher?
Yes, now I am. Somehow I found my way back into it. I think it's all, I don't think there's any separating it now. I think it's all just one. I mean, sometimes I'll get just as much inspiration from going through lesson plans or introducing projects or seeing what ideas students have, conversations with the students, and then I'll bring some of my work into school to work on, or if there's some downtime, or see what they're working on. So it's like, whether I'm at home or at work, I'm surrounded. I'm just buried in art, which
isn't it great?
I couldn't ask for a better balance.
I was talking to my thesis teacher and I was saying, I just go in the studio and work. She said, hey, intuitive work is fun. In that way, she gave me permission to do what I've done all my life as an artist, which is I go in the studio and I work to my own inner music, my own inner being.
Is this quote that you led me to, Cornell said, that they borrow from the universe and it's out there. Right?
Oh,
but
yeah.
they, right?
Yeah,
but
beautiful.
but they exploit the power that's within you. So pieces are interactive, they're contemplative, they make you think.
Those artists have this intimate approach to their artwork, and they've just always been a staple for me.
I started doing art when I was very little, but in India, when you take on, when you go to the science field, you're no longer creating art. You know, you're doing science, and that's it. That's what it is. That's how it's encouraged. So after retiring and so forth, I thought, oh, let me pick up art again. Then 2017, I met this beautiful lady who is a local artist. Her name is Cecilia Brendel, and she taught me the way to use oil colors, but paint it in a very nice and easy way, like, you know, very clean way. So that got me into deciding in 2018 that, okay, for my 58th birthday, I'm going to make 58 pieces of art. I made 58 pieces of art, actually more. And then I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this? So it's like, what jumped out at me is the color in my painting. So I regressed back to my childhood and I said, why is it that my paintings are so colorful? So I questioned and came to the conclusion that I have been using color all of my life. And because whenever I'm in a tense situation, whenever I'm depressed or anything, like if I'm taking an exam or a test, you would find me in very colorful saris. And so I thought, oh, so unknowingly, I've been using color to make me feel happy. Color has been studied for centuries. Right. What I want to study is quantitate what really is happening at a chemical level in the brain when you're exposed to color.
I did have a lot of art history learning ever since I was little because my parents were poets and my mom loved art. And so we went to museums a lot. So I ended up studying and completing art and art history as well as philosophy at SUNY Stony Brook. And then I ended up studying at Columbia University a little bit more of a theoretic approach and ended up teaching at Parsons School of Design, which didn't pay very well to an adjunct teacher, but they did offer any kind of courses in exchange in addition to what they paid. So I ended up studying a bit there, which was very influential. And so what happened was this was the era of conceptual art, which was great. You know, I learned a lot from New York City artists. And, you know, I became a conceptual artist myself. I was actually a big fan of Sol LeWitt. He made these geometric structures that really didn't have much color to them, but they were just kind of theoretical conceptual pieces. So I did a lot of that. And come to think of it, I did use a lot of recycling materials even then because my heart was always with recycling.
Okay, so recycling was very much a part of my household. My father was a farmer and my parents were very frugal. So we recycled early on in my childhood. And even as a young child, we had formed a club kind of called, what do we call it? Like the ecology club. But we would go and clean up the pond.
Your work is representing what's in your environment.
Yes,
You know.
it definitely does represent what's in my environment and my experiences in nature. I really enjoy just the elements of wind and rain and earth. And I pull all of those things into both my abstract artwork and my whimsical nature pieces.
I did have an amazing mentor before I got into high school, an artist named Joan Snitzer, and I would go down to her loft in Manhattan, and she would teach me the ways of art and the world, and that was amazing. And then I went to LaGuardia High School of the Performing Arts and Dance and Music and Art. And then I did go to SUNY Press, where I did most of my education, which was an amazing place for visual art. So I got a BFA there. You know, when I look to my more sculptural work, I really think of Eva Hesse and David Hockney, Giacometti. Those are some people that really speak to me.
And I think you mentioned Alice Neal in your bio. I want to speak to Alice Neal.
Very much. I feel like as a woman, it was also really important to see how neglected women portraiture artists were.
So what body of water would you like to say you're a steward of?
I live in Brooklyn, so there is the lake in Prospect Park. I live near the park.
So you're the steward of Prospect Park Lake.
I have this thing of sometimes, what can I do with what I already have that will take me someplace new?
My family and I, we were all living on a boat I guess we would be on the Atlantic, in the Cape Ann.
So you're the steward of the Sea of Cape Ann, then? Would we say that?
Yeah. It's, and the ocean is a big place, but it's amazing the trash you find in it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I mean, obviously, you know it. It reminds you, even if you're in the middle of the ocean, there's evidence of humans everywhere.
I grew up by a lake, but I feel like my journey as an artist really started when I was living in southern Brooklyn, in Bath Beach, which is right near like the Hudson and like the harbor.
So you would say you were a steward of the Hudson River?
Perhaps, I guess.
The nearest body of water would be the Rivanna River, cuts straight through Charlottesville, Virginia.
So you were a steward of the Rivanna River?
Yes.
I live out in Long Island in Bayshore, so I'm 15 minutes away from Robert Moses Beach.
So you're a steward of the Atlantic Ocean and Zach's Bay?
That's where I collect most of my seashells.
I would have to say probably the Long Island Sound.
So you are a steward of the Long Island Sound.
Really feel very connected to going to Hammonasset and doing a lot of beach combing. But unfortunately, we're also picking up a lot of pieces of plastic.
Most of the job sites my dad did were in Brooklyn. So Brooklyn, even down by Coney Island. And growing up, I was on Staten Island.
So you're a steward of Staten Island.
That's it. Yeah. So always near some kind of body of water there.
I was in Provincetown for a fellowship in 1981. And so that body of water is the Atlantic Ocean and the Provincetown Bay.
You were a steward of Provincetown Bay?
I was there in the winter, and it's way out on the peninsula. And you had to find ways to entertain yourself.
Okay, so I'm from the southwest part of India. So the Bay of Bengal, the Arabian Sea.
So you're the steward of the Bay of Bengal in the Arabian Sea.
My grandparents used to live right on the water, on the backwaters. And so I grew up, and that's where I feel the calmest is on the water.
So in my backyard, I have a tributary to the Lehigh River.
So you're a steward of the Lehigh River.
That probably is the closest one. It's called Fritz Run. And then there is a number of marshes. I'm on the game lands, so we have marshes and all the critters associated with that.
It's Crouch's Pond in Norwich, Connecticut.
So you were a steward of Crouch's Pond.
You know, that body of water and all, as you go deeper into the woods there were also other ponds. And pretty much so that's where I spent my childhood.
First really conscious recycling was starting a recycling program when I was a student at SUNY Purchase. They didn't have one, so I championed starting a college-wide recycling program there, and that I'd like to say is Rye Beach.
As stewards of the Sea of Rye Beach, New York. And what was the first thing that you repurposed? Do you recall?
I always wanted to volunteer, and so I went to the local hospital. And I've now been volunteering there, I think it's over 20 years. I ended up at one point working in the psych ward, and I wanted these people to do paper collage portraits of themselves so that they could see how they saw themselves, so they could tell their story. And I think it was after 5 years, my closet was just layered with all the ones I'd done of myself, making fun of myself so they'd know to have fun with it. And that summer, it was time for BWAC summer show. I hadn't fired anything in clay. It was too hot to fire. And I thought, well, let me get these portraits out and give them a background, and then I'll have something to put up on the wall. And so that sort of really began my repurposing with paper.
I had been making stuff at home all the time, just making sculptures with everything I could find around. And I finally got into a show. I drove all the way down there, 5 hours in the middle of the snowstorm. I was like, this is going to be the big thing. Came down there and no one else was there because it was the middle of a snowstorm and it was 5 hours away and I didn't know anyone there. And I was seriously bummed. I was like, I want to show my work in my home. Like, I want to show it in the place where I know my people are, and I can invite my friends and everyone to be around. And I wanted to have a community of artists that could do the same. I came back with from that experience, and a buddy of mine kind of messaged me where he was like, everyone was trapped inside and making stuff, but no one was seeing it. Everything just came together where essentially me, myself, and 7 other artists got together, and we just started putting on these shows like in the mid coast of Maine, like from Bristol, where I was living, up to Rockland, and then the majority around the Rockland area. And it was just very grassroots. We our first one was in it was in the house that I had just supposed to move into, and like it was totally empty. And so another one was at a farm, another one was at a brewery. And then we started going and working and like going into restaurants and bringing, like, we realized that we had a huge following there's a huge amount of artists in Maine that were being unseen because they were just so spread out, and we just wanted to make a place where they could all get together.
Oh, I love it. So you made it up? Like you guys collectively put it together?
We just put it together. We had no idea what we were doing. We'd never done it before. Never put on a show before.
Well, it's awesome.
People just wanted something. Our first show was Looking for Something to Do, was the name of it. And that was all we told people. It was like, if you're looking for something to do, here you go. We hand out flyers, and people came up in truckloads. And then the next one was Everything Must Go, and it was all about artists trying to, like, it was in the spring, and it was like trying to have everyone, you know, empty out all the work that you want to show that no one will look at, because they have their own standards. And so we had this really cool show where people could just empty out their inventories of art and just show it in this huge farm field. And the next one was Is It Cool If I Bring a Friend? And it was all about just artists coming together and celebrating their friendship. And it's just, the whole thing was just so great. Like, it was all collaborative. We all met weekly and just put shows together. And so we've been on a little bit of a hiatus right now because we've been all separated, but I'm going back to Maine soon, and a lot of people asking when the next show is going to be. And so I graduated 2020, so I came out into the pandemic. I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to start building stuff.
I've been making like art like this since I was a little kid. But I first started doing this seriously. Like, I started with like scrap leather and preserved plants. I would dry and preserve different botanicals with resin, or just drying techniques to use as little resin as possible, because it's kind of a gross material. So I started with that, but I work as a model and in the fashion industry a lot for my day job, my survival work. And because of that, I'm exposed to a lot of the wastefulness in the fashion industry, and just like how many textiles just are completely just discarded. And that ends up in waterways as well. So like a big part of me was interested in sculpture, but also just how to take all of this material that is cast off with so much use left in it and make it into something beautiful, like, and to have a new life.
I already had this interest previously in undergrad from my first mentor, and I also was curious about multiples. So I started to pay attention to, contemporary artists that use multiples, and found objects, recycled materials.
I work with sand and seashells, and this all started during COVID lockdown, when I'm sure everybody remembered we were all kind of pent up and there was like nowhere to go. Beaches opened up in May, and I went with my daughter. I hadn't been designing, I don't know, for a few months by then, and I was just popping. So I sat down and I just started, making a sea turtle. It needs to like be decorated with something. It needs to be bejeweled. So I just scanned, the sand in front of me, and there were just these beautiful small clamshells in all different colors, like yellow, white, and gray, that you see in my work a lot. And I just started laying it onto the turtle. It was really a plight to save the sea turtle.
Specifically, how I got started with the plastic bags is that I, like everyone else, would go to the grocery store or the farmer's market and get my stuff and be handed that plastic bag. And every single time you go, you get another plastic bag and another plastic bag. And of course, there are ways to recycle them. You should take them back to the store. But what I found is that I had a closet full of plastic bags. And at that point, I thought, what am I going to do with all of this plastic? I don't feel inclined to take it back to the store. There must be some artistic purpose that I can use this for. And that kind of was the beginning of my artistic journey with plastic. And I feel like what makes my work a little bit unique, sort of my signature, is that I use all different kinds of plastic that has been sort of in our environment, not just the grocery bags, but I use newspaper film. So for example, the New York Times comes in a plastic bag. I use that. I use the plastic that we're still, even though we've banned our grocery bags, right? We're still putting our plastic, our beets and our lettuce, we're still using plastic bags, some of us. The silvery emergency plastic that I use as well. And so I take all this stuff and I really treat it like a textile. I'm a textile artist. And so I use a lot of natural fiber as well as reused fiber in my work. I essentially cut it apart and I make sort of a type of yarn with it. And then I use traditional handwork methods, women's work, if you will, to knit, crochet, weave, and make just different kinds of items. For example, I made a tea set, a teapot, saucers, and teacups, and I sculpted them with crochet methods so that, there they are. And it's kind of like, why would someone do that? Like what are they sort of trying to say?
Right.
Is there really too much plastic in our world? Is this how we're supposed to be reusing the plastic? Like, kind of what does all this mean? And so it's part whimsical, but part deadly serious, right? Because we do have a huge problem with plastic in our oceans, plastic in our bodies, plastic in our environments, and we can't just throw it away anymore. There is no quote unquote away.
There are little robot sculptures I make from repurposed, upcycled electrical and plumbing pieces. And I vividly remember that first one that I made was just working with my dad. He's an electrician, so me and my brothers by default all know how to do electrical work. We would be his workers and assistants, helpers. So just being on a job site and seeing all of this material after a demo that just gets collected, swept up, and then dumped. And I thought, man, that's like stainless steel. There's some wires here. There's like all of this like legitimate stuff that definitely can't just get tossed out. So I would just kind of hoard it all together in a little side pile.
I had already completed my Master's of Fine Arts at Pratt Institute. Provincetown Work Center gives fellowships every year to 10 artists and 10 writers. So it's a community of artists that stay there for 7 months, live there, and have studios. I happen to get a real step into the art world from there. I painted for 30 years of my adult artist life, but because I was there being an artist 24/7, I was working with things I would find from the sea. Back then you could even find glass, polished glass from the sea, which doesn't happen so much anymore. And I also did a little bit of digging back then and found old bottles, and it was entertainment to just play around with found objects. So that was I got kind of a bug to do that.
During the pandemic, I was taking some art classes online at the university. And so there I learned about how people were writing stories about their past and their traditions and so forth. So the idea started forming 3 years ago, but then when the exhibition thing came up, I was already starting to work on fabrics. I wanted to do fabric art sculptures. So I wasn't buying new saris. I was just taking their old saris that they don't wear anymore and change them into sculptures. That's what I was doing.
I had a group of artists. It was called The Nine. It was women artists, and everyone had a different style. We exhibited at the gallery at Stony Brook, which was for our senior show. And then we exhibited at a small gallery in Soho. There was one place to eat called food and a bar, Broome Street Bar, I think was already there. But anyway, it was Rabinowitz and Guerra. And the piece I made was a conceptual piece that actually utilized both natural elements, that were basically branches found in the on the ground. I didn't cut them. And then rope.
My real first piece of art, I would say, was using scraps from my parents' wood shop and other found items and creating this sculpture that was all black. It was spray painted black and it was flat, kind of like a Louise Nevelson piece, but flat. And then I glued magazine pictures to it, and I'll never forget that piece.
I grew up in New York City. Even as a kid, I really pulled out things from my environment to create art. Before that was like a topical thing to do. So I would put things together and make them into little sculptures and such. But I was in the BWAC show 2 years ago as well. I had one piece there that was called Takeout. It's a large scale portrait on takeout containers that like the kind if you're going to go to a salad bar and you fill up your plastic carton.
Right.
So, face sewn on to the kind of plastic that you find at construction sites that's like netting, plastic netting. And that was sewn onto paper.
Please tell us about your artwork in the BWAC exhibit.
The first one that was made out of all the wrapping paper is called Is This Enough? And I think it comes from doing my work in the psych ward where people would do their portrait and they needed me to approve of not the art, but really approve of who they were. When I was doing this piece, it just made me think of people, especially coming out of the pandemic. And people have spent so much time with themselves. And then you're out there bringing yourself back into the world again. You're worried, like, is this enough? And the subtitle for that one really is, or is it too much? It was fun taking the cardboard box and ripping off the top so you got the corrugated part. And I liked how there are little bits still left. And then I cut some of it up and I made like a checkered background. And then, she had her hair. And then I gave her this pretty dress, but it was made out of the brown paper that was all crinkled up. And I put a floral thing on it. So I like how it sort of grew. That nature is always a part of what I do. There are always plants or flowers or vines or something in there. And then the other piece, who I think is now called the Lady of the Lake. Years ago, somebody had given me a tube of rolled up Mylar. It was silver paper. It was silver plastic. And I just used it for whenever I needed to have a mirror or if I was making eyeglasses for one of the things. And I was once again visiting my best friend from college in North Carolina, and her husband was showing me his workshop. And he likes to take old beat up trucks and refurbish them. And so he had this really old, like 1910 pickup truck or something like that. And I looked and there were all these silver shavings. And I said, can I have some of those? So he sent me a little box of it and I realized, oh, now I can use that roll of silver stuff. And so first she was going to be the Tin Man's mother. I was going to make a dress for her and I wanted the dress to have good support underneath. So I needed to make her breast. And then I liked the breasts so much, I didn't want to cover them up. So it became like a little bustier in a way. And so then she became the Iron Maiden. I was putting on her mouth. I had a hard time gluing it down because it was plastic. The stuff would just pop off. So I had to change the kind of glue that I was using. And it left a little residue. And I tried to scrape away the residue and it scratched her face. And so I had to cover that up rather than starting all over again. So I put the hand up there. And once I put the hand up, then she had a softness to her. So she couldn't be the Iron Maiden anymore. And I just had, left over from Christmas, all the silver wrapping paper. And so I cut that all up and that became the leaves growing up from the bottom. It was for our narrative show that BWAC had. And because it kept changing who she was to me, I decided to just put paper up and to have people tell me who she was. And so everyone had a different interpretation.
For those listening, Cans is a series of collected and assorted just cans. It's like paint cans, soda cans, beer cans, coffee cans. I'm a house painter, and I took old paint and I had a lot of caulking and stuff like that, and I turned them into essentially breasts. Very, very rudimentary, like simple materials, not super realistic, but breasts. So yeah, the thought process behind that was just, yeah, I've been working in the trades for a long time, and I love it. I love working with my hands, and there's a lot of times there's great people, but sometimes there's just people that really can rub you the wrong way, and it's not an industry that's checked. There's no human resource people. It's people are there. If they're willing to show up and do hard work, they have a job. Some of these people really just they take this opportunity to say whatever they want when they're, you're sitting around for lunch. I started when I was in high school, and I was my first experience. I was raised by sisters, and like not around a lot of men. I've always been intimidated by man things, and just hearing some of the stuff that was going around was just, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I like kind of like bit my tongue for a while, because I was like, I'm young. This is clearly very normal in this industry, and I don't really know what to do about it. And then it wasn't until I was literally I was working on an island in Maine called Islesboro, and we were building a house, and I was with a very small group of people. We spent all our time together, and it was very intimate. And this guy, Scott. His name is Scott. I'm not afraid to say his name, because basically what happened was I was talking about my sister, who is a sailor, and it works on cargo ships and spends all of her time just working 3 months on, 2 months off. Every time she gets you could see the emotional kind of cycle she has to go through to get herself ready for it, because it's the whole time she's the only woman on a boat surrounded by men, and they're also same situation, really, like unchecked. If there are people that have this industry, like they're short on work, and there's no one on board who's like making sure people are following a set of guidelines or anything like that. And she has just gotten talked down to, and like she's saved. It's amazing. I'm amazed that some of the boats that she's on haven't sunk, because of like some of these guys will not take advice specifically because it comes from her, even though it is the exact right thing to do. And I was explaining all this to this man who I was working with, and in the middle of it, he was like, "Is she hot? She got nice cans." I just said all this thing is about this person who's just like these like amazing, like like the stories that she has, and I could tell about her. I could talk forever about her. And I blew up, and I got so upset. And I think for the first time I realized, I don't have to just put up with it. I don't have to listen to it. I don't want to hear it. And I'm gonna build exactly what people like this guy wanted to see, and wanted to associate the human body, which is it's unique. It's, every single person it's a soft, beautiful thing that is ever changing, and it's not something that you throw away.
You say, so he can see exactly what he always wanted, a nice set of cans.
Yeah.
Someone was interacting with it and really, studying it. And what she said, are those nibbles? And it's conceptual, and it is a recycled show. The lady was really reaching. It was great. I thought I'd mention it to you when you signed up for this. I thought, he has to hear this feedback. It was great.
I love it.
Let's talk about grocery line at BWAC.
Yeah, so that was a fun piece. That was one of the things I did when I was at home with the pandemic after graduating.
So Gus, where did you find all the bags?
It was all these bags, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these bags that we collected for years. My parents just never threw them out. Didn't want to throw them out. And so I was like, I gotta do something with them. I wanted to make it so long because of the grocery lines I was sitting in during the pandemic, just the absurdity of everything that was happening at the moment, and the inefficientness of it all.
The sculpture that was in the recycle show was a mannequin that I had gotten from a store in Soho, and I had used this like off-cast like cotton like twine just to make something out of it. Because I end up with so many like just bits of fabric and waste from just being in fashion all the time, and you just see so much of it just go straight into the garbage, which is just horrible. I love the space of that building. I'm so glad you brought it up because that is such an interesting location. Like I love from like the beams to the bricks there. But I really love that they did have the walls blank around the sculpture because the fiber of the way that I do this type of like crochet and weaving, like I am really thinking about how light travels through onto the walls like around it.
Right.
I think about how those shadows are cast while I'm making the piece, because a big part of it is how the sculpture not only enters the space but changes the space a little bit. Having the ability of it to like actually freely turn in space and like cast those different shadows on the wall was like really great to just have people be able to interact with that aspect of my work.
For that particular piece, wanted to create my own architecture. You know, this is such like a versatile piece because it can go up just about anywhere. And it can like bridge between surfaces of a gallery. I've always wanted to like bridge this like very narrow tightrope of whimsical but like sinister, and the title always helps make it feel a little bit more sinister. It
Right.
grows so ambiguous.
Ties it right back to the molecular aspect of germs, and has a double register. You say, it's an affect. Kind of
Absolutely.
thing, right?
Yeah. I had been working previously with fractal patterns where the edge there's like an infinite edge to the shape. So I have these big cells, and then as you go out to the edges, it becomes smaller and smaller. And I wanted to evoke this sort of growing sensation. And it is composed of multiple, I guess you could call them cells, which is articles of clothing, both my own and friends, family, and it's just this wrapping technique. And then the outer layer, kind of like the cell wall, I suppose you could call it, is insulation foam. And we're coming out of one of the most interesting experiences in recent memory, a shared trauma of pandemic. So there's something really fascinating yet terrifying about an unknown organic entity kind of growing, and I suppose the material elicits a further uncanny association. Synthetics or something personal like articles of clothing ground it in an area that I don't think is natural. The other piece that I have in the show is much smaller. It's sort of the polar opposite to It Grows, because it's taking the molecular, or It Grows was like taking the molecular, making it human size, making it bigger than life. And this is the opposite. It's now you're entering the world of the molecular. So it's a light box in which there's reminiscent of the cells on the wall. There's smaller cells, single-use straws, and I've kind of created like little microbes, and I named it microplastics, very tongue-in-cheek. And I have this wonderful concave lens, so it makes things look even smaller. So that's right on top of the box, and you can peer right in. It's lit from underneath, sort of like a microscope. I created it in a residency. The first showing of those pieces, one of 3, and the other 2 are variations on the concept. And like a dry room, I had made like a sound component to it as well. Yeah, it was a lot more involved. And this showing, I kind of like, it gives the single light box a chance to shine by itself.
I created the tiger because it was the year of the tiger. And my father, who passed about 10 years ago, him being my inspiration, his sign was the tiger. And the name, the word fierce was really describing him and his life journey and the success he built. Also, I think the fierce really describes the characteristic of a tiger, almost like your spirit animal. That's just a little tidbit, a personal note on how that piece really came about. It was just like, natural, serendipitous that, there were these clamshells there. It was very crude, very, very raw, rough, but the idea was there and I was intrigued. So like for me, it's important to just even showcase these clams. Tigers are endangered species. I would like to focus on animals that are, endangered, that needs a voice, like a showcase, needs a spotlight.
Yes.
So people are aware that they are disappearing. Like, do something about it. And I think collective awareness is the beginning of doing something.
Plastic yarn patchwork blanket. And it is a work that's made entirely with plastic, cut up and made into yarn. And then I hand knitted each of the individual squares separately, and then I hand sewed them together with another piece of plastic. What sort of stands out to me and the backstory is that, you know, it takes a long time to collect the amount of plastic that you would need to create something like that. And I tried to be careful to, you know, make it sort of aesthetically appealing. I've got the reds in there and the purple and the pink and the green. But again, the flip side of that is, oh, how gross. Like, why do we have so much different plastic and so many different colors and so many different, you know, markings on it? It's really just overwhelming. But when friends and family found out that I was sort of getting into creating stuff with plastic to raise awareness, everybody was like, oh, I'm going to save my plastic for you, right? So I would have people handing me just really cool plastic bags. So in that piece, you will see a leopard print plastic bag, for example, that a friend here in Connecticut gave me from a package store. There's a purple bag in that patchwork blanket that came from a grocer in Chinatown, New York. And you know, I saved that one. And then just other places, the dollar store, for example. And so they have these beautiful yellow, or they had beautiful yellow plastic bags. And so you'll see a lot of yellow in that too. And, you know, I think, again, taking a step back from a piece like this, which kind of circles back to where we started the conversation, kind of how did you get interested in making things with plastic bags? And it's kind of like, well, you know, at that point in my artistic sort of journey, I was using what I had. I had a closet full of plastic that didn't need to be there, needed to do something with it. And how does that connect with people throughout history, right? Using what they have, using whatever materials you have at hand to decorate, to provide basic needs for your family, make curtains, make rugs. I don't think our forebears had this in mind, right? I don't think that we would have to be using plastic, but I think, again, you know, there is so much plastic that I don't think it's kind of a sign of the times that you would have an artist like me who's making things out of plastic bags. You know, again, yes, craft is a slow process, and when you choose to sort of engage with this and with recycled materials, you really like not to aggrandize it, but you're sort of giving back. It's like a gift that you're giving back, right? To the community, to those around you, and you're kind of taking this important work out of your studio, out of your home, and you're giving people really the joy of seeing something unexpected. I think it's just that shift, right? Those really tiny shifts in moments that people can kind of, you know, bend their perspective and encourage them to just think about something just a little bit differently and take that message away from you. And that's why I just really honor places like BWAC and others who are just really pushing this work out to the public and making it, you know, out there for people.
The recycle show at the BWACers, there are little robot sculptures I make from repurposed, upcycled electrical and plumbing pieces.
Renee was the curator, and your piece was, or your two pieces were front and center in front of the recycle poster. You had window light on your work, which is really pretty because you could see through it, and felt a little bit like the circus. It felt like, I don't know, it had like, you know, that symbolism, and it had a playfulness to it.
I mean, it's always kind of been like an inside joke at the school with the art studio itself, because it's like, you know, what things have I brought in to the studio now, and the storeroom is just a collection. I mean, living in Brooklyn, just walking around when, you know, it's bulk garbage day, we find some real gems, and I can't leave them there. So I mean, if I find old lamps, you know, old chairs, like anything comes in, and I mean, you put a lamp or a chair, something in the middle of an art studio, it's like that's
great, right?
That's just asking for ideas.
Exactly.
But I like out of the ordinary material, mixing just classic standard like art material, if there is a classic standard art material, and mixing that with something that no one would assume belongs in an art studio. And I think that's where you get the most interesting finished pieces.
You know, we go right to your piece. It's called Curtainless Shower.
That has been a piece that's been in my studio, and I had it mounted on the wall. And one day in the late afternoon, the sun hit the prisms and it became a whole nother piece because it was all lit up. I just love that moment for that piece, but I think it stands on its own.
Like, what did you say? That was from an old newspaper advertisement.
Well, the piece itself has an imprint. The armature is actually a product called a needle shower or curtainless shower, and you would mount it with a hose on a bathtub. So that's how it was sold. And they have an actual picture of the guy braving his chest against this needle shower and enjoying himself. So I looked it up, and there it was from 1916. They used to sell these things. So it's probably that old. It just happened to be lying around in my husband's workshop. And I said, you don't really need this. So he reluctantly gave it up.
Great.
As many of my found objects come from people giving up what they really don't have any more purpose for. As most pieces in my studio, they kind of sit around and they begin to grow, and I cruise around looking for something, the next part that's going to work. In that piece, I was gifted an old chandelier, an old broken down chandelier, and I had all these really fantastic crystals from that chandelier that needed to be used, and it wove in with some old necklaces, and I really had fun with the weaving of it because that was a skill that I loved as a young person. Like, I'll get a tool that is just a really interesting shape, and you know that it's some kind of antique, and I'll match it up with Google Photos and I'll find out the actual original purpose of it. It adds to my interest. For some viewers, it's really a way into to think about the piece.
Right, like a reuse, so it's form and function, right? So they could tap into the history of it.
Right, or
Right.
In some cases, I had some plumber chain as part of a tableau, and the plumber who came to that apartment to fix something said, "Oh, I use that chain," and then he was able to look at the
great.
artwork and be engaged in it because he could recognize something that was familiar to him.
This particular project, the sculpture that I took on, it was based on saris. You know, Indian women wear a lot of saris, and they are gorgeous pieces of fabric, like 6 yards in length, and not all of them get used all the time, you know.
Right.
So yeah, sometimes, you know, they will give it to their friends and relatives after a single use, or sometimes 3 or 4 uses, and then sometimes they just destroy it. So my goal is to make more sculptures. Actually, I decided I'm going to make 100 sculptures. So my goal was to write a children's book and a coffee table book with these sculptures, because these sculptures are huge. You know, the one that you saw is a little bit not as huge as the ones that I'm trying to propose. And once you put it up, you photograph them. So I want to write a grant to get a photographer to come and take beautiful pictures, so that those can go in a book. And so with each of these sculptures, I'm highlighting social issues that are current, that affects not just the Indian community, but the entire world, okay? And I'll make beautiful sculptures, talk about where these fabrics are from, talk about the stories of the women that wore them, and then bring together like a social issue and talk about it so that people are sensitized to the fact of community.
Oh, I applaud you. I mean, you'll
thank
you'll
you.
always be an educator.
Yes,
You know?
absolutely.
I was cleaning up my attic. I just fell in love with this pipe. It's an HVAC circa 1965 pipe. And I said, oh, this is a beautiful sculpture. So it's set on my cabinets forever without a base. Okay.
Right.
And then somehow across my screen came a call for recycle art from BWAC. And I said, oh my God, I'm sitting right in front of it. Why don't I just put it together and make it really into a sculpture? So I found a piece of reclaimed wood in my garage, which is redwood, and it comes from my forest. So it's a cutoff, and it was kind of probably going to be thrown out. So I took it to the engraver in Dunmore, actually, near where I live.
Just wanted to applaud you that you were channeling Marcel Duchamp and his ready-mades and in terms of taking the mundane and the mass-produced.
So I entered BWAC with the pipe, and they accepted it. And the moment they accepted it, I was so proud. And before I even finished my morning coffee, the piece was sold.
Congratulations.
Which was interesting.
Fantastic.
Thanks. It's very funny because actually he wrote me that his father was an HVAC installer, and that the piece appealed to him on a lot of different levels. And I thought, and I wrote him that it really made me feel good that I was able to dignify his father's work by really putting this pipe on a pedestal, literally, and giving it a plaque. And I think possibly, since it's from about 1965, possibly he saw those types of pipes with his father installing them. So you never know who your work is going to appeal to and why, you know. Exactly. But I was very thrilled.
I was creating these pieces, and then all of a sudden, after they were done, I got an email invitation to submit work. And so it really wasn't created for the show, but I'm delighted that it was juried into the show.
So this became the title after.
Yes, that's what you do when you're creating sometimes.
Right. After, when I was a teacher for 30 years, art teacher, and I used to say, perhaps when we go to a gallery, don't look at the tag first.
A full day, yes. The title came last. What happened was last year I moved 3 times and my life was full of cardboard. Being an artist, you own a lot. You have a lot of art and supplies and so on and so forth. So I have had a lot of cardboard. And I was having an event just for my collectors, and I created these mugs. And when they came in, each one was individually packaged. And throughout that time, I had all the cardboard, you know, I passed it on so other people could move and things like that. But when these came in, I was like, I really need to use these and create something. So I started, and I like tearing the cardboard because you get different edges, you get deckled edges, and creating all of these different shapes. And if you cut it, you can get a really straight, you know, solid line or a jagged line with it. So I liked that. And I also like when you tear it, that you get the space where the ridges are also. So you can kind of see those vertical or horizontal striped ridges on the interior of the cardboard.
Right. It's so romantic. I do it. For those people listening, I mean, those people who love cardboard, just know, you know when you know.
So I'm primarily a painter. So I'd paint a layer, and then I'd add more cardboard pieces. And so it kept changing and developing in that way. And as it developed, it looked kind of landscape-ish. And so it looked almost like sunrise, sunset, and a moon. And so that came to be a full day.
I had 2 pieces in the show. One was a recycled glass piece called What's Good to Drink. It's also a portrait. All my work is portrait based, and it's a interesting 3-dimensional placement of the bottles, and then oil paint on the bottles, and they're sunk into clay with recycled wire around that. And the other piece is one of my bubble wrap series, similar to the one that you can see behind me right now. It's a found frame. I sew the bubble wrap on and paint a portrait onto that.
Before we sign off, want to leave us with what your goals are, what's your mission?
I think you have to sort of surrender to the process. The moment you try to control what it's going to be, it loses its soul. I've now gotten into taking work that maybe I liked at the time. Maybe the story is different from me and reconstructing them.
Right, like
And so-
evolving, right?
Yeah. And so I like it that I'm now surrendering to,
I love it.
because I did that, it doesn't have to
Yes.
stay that. I can change it into something else.
That's my word. I love that. I love using the word. I write it all the time in the sand. I do.
Well, I was once talking with two other women artists, and they were both talking about how they were struggling, controlling, making their thing into something.
Mhm.
And they were the ones that realized that I kept saying surrender.
Yes.
And I was happy with the results of what I was getting, and they weren't, because
Right.
they were too busy trying to control.
Control it.
Art is a living thing. You have to let it live and breathe and tell you who it's going to be or what it's going to be.
Fantastic.
And so that's why it's fun for me taking things and just saving them.
So yeah, Shel Silverstein is one of my favorite artists. He is, I think, just an absolute nut job, and I think no one ever asked. I found his music when I was in college, and I realized I didn't know he had music, and I was like, this guy writes children's books. And then I started listening to music, and it's just crazy and just absolutely bonkers. And I'm like, it is amazing to me that a public figure who was writing children's books exists in that time, and also just be his absolute self. And I was like, that is
unapologetically. That's what your word is. What is it? Now, after years of accumulating knowledge, I've learned that everybody is just making educated guesses. So it's okay to be wrong sometimes. I mean, that was basically his message too, right? It's just like, hey, the only way to figure it out is just do it and get started doing it. That's what we're about here. That's what we're trying to say, just get going and put your gear and go.
Or sometimes always looking for someone to tell them to, this is your moment. Like someone waiting for someone to be like, this is your time. And I think I was doing that for a while. Right. And I realized you just gotta just start putting yourself out there and being your truest self, and just knowing that if the right people are gonna see that and love it. Right. And I wanted to just live my life exactly like that. Just not just being as humanly myself as I could, and not have to. I mean, obviously everyone makes mistakes, and I apologize for stuff I do all the time. But yeah, it's weird to find beauty in trash sometimes. Just putting it in different space. I mean, like, it's not a good thing that this is here, but at least now it's being enjoyed in a different way than it was before. And maybe if we can if we can find new purposes for things that have already been made, then we don't to necessarily throw them into the landfill. I think artists are going to be a huge part in the environmental revolution.
That's what I call it. I was just going to say that we are the reuse revolution. We're revolutionaries.
I'm starting a teaching fellowship. I've always wanted to be an art teacher as well. And I am trying to get the excitedness of that going on. So I see myself hopefully in my own classroom, surrounded by kids, yelling, screaming.
Do it. It's the best. I miss it so much. I do. You'll come back and visit us, will you? And let us know where you're at, and
100%.
And all those minds you're messing with being an art teacher.
I love the idea. I'm not personally a very religious person, but I find the reliquaries built to saints to be a very interesting and very human thing. Building this beautifully ornate metal and fine gemstoned vessel for something that's a fragment of a person or a fragment of something holy is a very much a way of honoring a part of what makes us human. And so it's almost building little moments that cause us to pause and appreciate something small. It's it brings something that would be otherwise completely overlooked, a fragment of a bone is brought to this level of having a godlike status. And I think it's really interesting to transform a physical material into something that we have so much mental weight towards and such an appreciation towards. I have really been loving the communities that I've been a part of and been able to create through art, and getting to share that part of myself in a way that feels so fulfilling.
I love this quote, and then I think you let us hear, is the need to be entertained in art is a big issue. But part of the whole visual arts is about slowing down our ability to look and to experience. Like part of the sustainability is just to understand your surroundings and be where you are, right? And so,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I dream big, so I'm hoping to, put my foot in every single door possible, try and get in any shows I can, put my name out there.
Great.
Some professors say, when you graduate, you have about like a 5-year window where you're considered an emerging artist. So I'm going to take advantage of that and apply to things that, maybe more established artists can't necessarily get, funding or stuff like that. And I want to make big projects. I know that big doesn't equal successful, but I can just see some things in my head that I want to make, and I don't have the funds at the moment. A mentor more on the art history side, he always gave me the advice that if your sculpture has multiple registers, like it's evoking something in your viewer from multiple different angles, multiple different avenues, that's a successful piece. So even though my work has a foundation in science, as you said, I love hearing what people see. Maybe 5 years is a good benchmark. I do want to teach. I think I've had so many amazing people in my life who have been instrumental in me growing and finding something that I actually love doing. I actually enjoy what I do. And if I could give that to someone else, that'd be fantastic. My dad is a professor, but of engineering. And just seeing the way that he kind of has a lot of self-gratification from teaching younger people. I can see myself doing that as well.
I go to these libraries and I do these workshops with adults and teens, and we make, I've made like peacocks, seahorse, mandala. Like I've kind of somehow gotten to the teaching realm, and people can see, that we have all these beautiful marine life out there. I hope to be part of more of these gallery shows.
I was honored to receive the Connecticut Sea Grant award. And so a lot of my practice now, I've sort of shifted away from the plastic, and I'm working on some harmful algal blooms is what they're called, which are a result of the acidic conditions in our oceans and in Long Island Sound. And so I've picked a couple of them to study and then to recreate with some fiber methods. And with, again, the hope of we enjoy this beautiful water around us, what's really in it and what's really happening as we move forward, and how can we sort of help people visualize that and gain a greater appreciation for it, and then in turn kind of become part of the solution for doing something about it. It damages our body, these algal blooms, it hurts the shellfish industries, and so on and so forth. So that's a huge project that I'm working on right now. And in 5 years, oh my gosh, well, I hope there won't be so much plastic around. I hope that I won't be have so much access to that to do my artwork. I really love the other piece of what I like to do is I like to do a lot with reclaimed textiles. Afghans, blankets, pieces that maybe your great grandmother made for the grandchild or something like that. I love sort of harvesting these forgotten textiles that have a story, and kind of honoring their story, and then like creating something new with them, and pushing it back out to the community with all kinds of embroidery messages or mending or what have you. So I really am hoping to get back into a little bit more of that practice kind of in the long term.
Some kind of art, what that is, I think that depends on who I come in contact with over the next year, or what location I'm in the next year. That's going to influence my environment. Always influences me, and it always kind of gets channeled through me, and art comes out in some way, shape, or form.
I'm drawn to this whole idea of this, balloon imagery. And in your bio, it's about semiotics and unknown symbols and things like that. You want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I could. I mean, it's one of those things that's always it was a quick sketch one year in high school, and I still remember it. It was just a little doodle in my business law notebook. I was just cleaning out my room at my parents' house one day, came across that notebook, and that something about that image just stuck with me, and I tried it realistic, cartoon, fast, abstract, everything. So it's just that's the constant, and then everything kind of revolves around that.
The masters that you love are on the Basquiat and Martha Rothko, and it seems very fitting.
Somewhat of a bad habit, but
Yeah.
I'm not too sorry about it. So once I'm done making the piece, I think my interest is in creating it, making it. If it's hanging around too long, I'll either paint over it, reuse it for a different project, break it down, make something bigger, or just put it out to take. And yeah, it usually doesn't have much of a lifespan. So I'll try to keep it moving.
No, you could say, hey, I saw that before. And then you start to learn the artist just because it's everywhere.
That symbolism and semiotics, and just like, you'll recognize an image, not because you know anything about it, but it becomes familiar because of repetition.
Well, they're lucky to have you, because some people can't kick it. They can't start it. They're what is art, or what is it supposed to be, and all that. And then, you could be that teacher that you met up with early on in your life. And I'd like to think I was somebody coming up unconventional that way too. A little makes people uncomfortable. They like to have the questions and answers answered. And I mean, we make people a little uncomfortable.
I think if you're in an art studio, or a student in an art studio, I think if it's too comfortable, then something's probably a little off. You gotta get a little uncomfortable to, I think, make progress.
I feel like I've met a whole family of people that are like myself, and if you dream it, you can get it.
That's it. Yeah, I think as corny as it sounds, I think that's 100% true.
Still be messing in my studio. Well, I recently had an open studio. My studio is in Vinegar Hill, Brooklyn. So the Dumbo Open Studios and Vinegar Hill combined together and for a weekend, and it was really fantastic this year because they highlighted Vinegar Hill, which, if people don't know about that neighborhood, they would want to know about it. It's a really special, historically preserved neighborhood right between the Navy Yard and Dumbo. So it's kind of, this magical place. I live and work here, so that's a big part, will continue to be essential in my life. I also really enjoy and do a lot of gardening. So I'm only interested in planting native plants. I appreciate all plants, but for the last 5 years or so, I've really become very knowledgeable and find the whole pollinator world of keeping insects and birds and important creatures nourished is part of the world of native plants.
Right. The migratory patterns of the monarchs. I think a lot of people don't understand that they come through our coast, and how they travel.
So as a scientist, you apply for grants and so forth. So as an artist, I said, okay, let me look at if there are granting opportunities, and there are several granting opportunities. I applied for a grant. It's a teaching artist residency grant, and I hope I get it. It is to bring art integration into a local school that the students are not passing Ohio Department of Education minimum standards. So I want to do that into started with elementary and middle school, and then follow these kids on through for 13 years, right from pre-K to 12, and see where they go. And I hope to develop an art integration program and write about, publish what my findings are of the effects of art integration. There's been a lot of research that's out there, but I'm very sorry to say that, our public school system, or private school system for that matter, does not use art integration principles. And so, children learn differently. Yes. So why are we not using the existing research to show that this makes a difference?
Right, because we're teaching to the standards. And
exactly.
cranking it out, right? The integration. I think what's really exciting, I teach professional development to adults, and they're asking for choice-based classrooms. So that's exciting to me
Yeah.
that they're actually focusing on that.
Yes.
It's coming around. I mean, learning isn't a cookie cutter. We know that. So for a student to have a choice base, it's not as easy for the teacher, right?
Right.
You have to
Right.
modify and have a modifications. But I
Right.
think with that focus of having a student-led classroom is important. So that's a
Yeah.
nice focus. I'm
Yeah.
happy to report from my end in New York.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a great question, Laura. Thank you for asking. In Poland, when I was there, I loved how they had behind closed doors recycling and then other, materials all separated. So I would like within a year to be able to either rejoin the board and effect a transition back into recycling.
I work in a wonderful place. I'm here right now at Mill House. Mill House is a creative co-working space just for women. It is a wonderful place for women to flourish and thrive, to be creative, to work together. And it's in an old cotton mill in the wonderful town of McKinney, where I live.
During a pandemic, and who wants to speak of that ever again? But I just thought it was so interesting how you were helping restaurant owners.
Just really broke my heart when things got so hard for them. And I thought to myself, how can I help them? It happened because we were getting food to go from these places, and there were so many takeout containers. So I just started washing them and collecting them, and I had piles of them. And looking at them one day and listening to the news about restaurant closures and how hard it was for these restaurants to survive, I put this idea together of painting the owners in their own takeout containers and then having that for free for them displayed where you would go get your food picked up, because most of the time the restaurant itself was really closed and they might like meet at the door, or you might come to a counter where you were just interacting with one person, but that wasn't necessarily the owner, and you didn't know who you were really giving your business to. So it would give you a sense of who the owner was, have them be proud of their work and their hard work to stay open, and everybody was really scared, and an opportunity to celebrate them and do something good and talk about the environment, because then I was hoping that it would make people at least try to recycle all those takeout containers. If they came to the restaurant, they saw this cool thing, and they would not then think of just like trash.
Putting hope where there isn't any, or we didn't know how long that was going to last.
I went to this one restaurant, I think it was my third or fourth restaurant that I was partnering with. It's called Ant's Pants, and there are 3 owners. And they were working so hard, just the 3 of them were in there like busting, and they had a window that they created where you could come get your takeout. And I brought the portraits of them. So there were 3 portraits. That was done in kind of cardboard box of containers, and I sewed them together so there were the 3 of them in a pyramid shape. And when I brought it to them, I had them close their eyes, so it was like a big reveal. And when they turned around and opened their eyes and they saw it, their reaction was it was hope. That was hope for me then. It was a really hard, scary time for everyone, and they were whooping and clapping and crying, and it was just, and they still have it. It's still sitting in there. They love it, and it's wonderful.
And maybe if you want to stretch it to 5, not necessarily in that order, or what looks like what you want to be doing in a year.
Great question right now, because I am working on trying to have some change. I'm actively really trying to have change, and as a physical therapist, and I work with my body all the time, and my body is starting to not be so thrilled with my work schedule and asking for less. So working on figuring out how to work less and do more art.
Well, you spoke it to the universe.
A 10-year goal, but it's out there.
Speak it up.
And I would really love to have more. Like, I'm having a lot of, it's wonderful. I'm having a lot of press and a lot of shows, and I'm really grateful for it. But I would love to not have to propagate that myself. Like, I would love for people to be coming to me more, saying, I want to show your work, which actually happened with the Recycle show. The curator invited me to come back. That was really nice.
That's the essence of what we're doing here. The participants down in BWAC, they were invited here to speak with stewards, and in the sense that we conjured this up. Everybody just said, yes, let's give it a shot, and we'll interview all of you and see how it goes. And much like yourself, it's coming toward me. I understand that completely, right? As long as you're open to it, and I asked for it. So
I'm very happy that people are starting to do more of the upcycled, recycled work that's been part of my everyday existence for a really long time. Just taking stuff off the street and making it into something beautiful, it has been a passion of mine for a really long time, and I'm glad that it's being more celebrated and recognized. So,
oh, well, I thank you. We thank you to being a Stewards of the Sea of Rye Beach, New York. And
New Year's Eve would jump in the water. It was the revibrance of life. So
excellent. Well, thank you for everything you do, and I appreciate. Obviously, we're in the same boat here. We have the same mission, the regenerative, and I thank you for being with us today.
thank you so much.